My name is Corwin Dre, and on the night of my wife's company award ceremony, I stood at the edge of a grand hotel ballroom like a shadow without purpose. 8 years ago, I had fallen in love with Isla's brilliance and fire. For nearly a decade, I had worked in the background, tuning algorithms, troubleshooting databases, and sacrificing nights to freelance projects so she could chase her corporate dreams. Yet here I was, flowers in hand, suit pressed, the hopeful grin of a proud husband plastered to my face, only to be stopped cold by a security guard whose uniform and clipped tone made me feel less than human. "You can wait outside," he said, his eyes already wandering away as though I were nothing more than a stray. Inside, the chandeliers gleamed, the clinking of champagne glasses created a soft symphony, and every partner of every honoree sat in padded velvet chairs. I should have been among them. Instead, I lingered in the corridor, my palms slick against the bouquet of lilies and orchids I'd chosen for her. A siren glow spilled under the doorway as the guard's authoritative silhouette blocked my hopes. I swallowed down the wave of humiliation that curled in my chest. I'd built her career from the ground up, every milestone, every promotion, every accolade. But validation meant nothing without a seat beside her. Then I saw her. Isla stood center stage, laughter dancing on her lips as she leaned into a man whose presence I'd never witnessed until tonight. His hand rested casually on her shoulder. His rich laughter filled the room and washed over me like an accusation. Her silk gown shimmered. Her eyes sparkled as if she were enthralled by a performance I couldn't see. Every other partner exchanged proud glances or whispered congratulations, but she shared his warmth and elegance with a smile that cut deeper than any blade. When her gaze flicked to me, I expected the betrayal to waver her composure, but she didn't flinch. Her smirk said it all. I had already been replaced. He pulled behind my collar. 1,000 memories of late-night strategy sessions and whispered reassurances surfaced, only to be drowned by the cold realization that my labor had been loaned out to someone else's victory. In that moment, I felt invisible, an unpaid consultant, an accessory left at the door. The man beside her raised his glass. She lifted hers to meet him in a toast. Their eyes locked, and my heart cracked. I refused to shrink in the face of this betrayal. Instead, I straightened my shoulders, drew a slow breath, and slipped my phone from my pocket like a weapon aimed at injustice. My thumbs moved with deliberate calm as I opened a new message to Valenrock, the CEO I'd only met once in a whirlwind of boardroom introductions. 8 years ago, I had laid the foundation for the very analytics engine that drove every decision in Isla's division. Tonight it would have its revenge. Each tap of the screen echoed my fury and my dignity. When I finished typing the 4 words that would upend their complacency, "Check your email now," I felt something I hadn't in years: certainty. I glanced back at the doorway. The guard's posture remained rigid, unconcerned by my actions. Behind him, I caught a glimpse of Isla's companion pausing mid-laugh, as though sensing a disturbance. But while her partner's curiosity flickered, Isla's expression hardened. She pursed her lips in a practiced mask of composure, as if daring me to crumble. A cold surge of satisfaction warmed my veins. I had so much more evidence than a single glance or a borrowed seat. I had every timestamped login, every encrypted file hash, every recorded confession of contribution that proved her triumph was built on my code. Without hesitation, I pocketed the phone and turned on my heel. My footsteps echoed against the marble floor as I strode away from the door that had barred me. I felt the weight of countless nights of unacknowledged labor lift from my shoulders, replaced by a fierce resolve. Each step carried me further from the role of invisible spouse and closer to a reckoning I had long prepared for in the silent hours of my study. I reached the end of the corridor, where the muted hum of the ballroom seemed to stretch into eternity. With one final look through the frosted glass, I watched the silhouettes of champagne flutes and tuxedos, of hollow applause and hollow triumphs. Then I pressed the door shut behind me. The click of the latch resembled the final line of code I would ever write for someone who refused to see me. Outside, the night air was cool against my skin, clear, unburdened, and fiercely mine. I inhaled deeply and embraced the promise of what came next. I still remember the first time I saw Isla present in that cramped lecture hall during our first week of grad school. She strode to the podium with a confidence that made heads swivel, her slides dancing to life beneath her fingertips, each data point woven into a narrative that crackled with clarity. I sat in the third row, gripping my notebook as though it were a lifeline, utterly captivated by the intelligence unfurling before me. Afterward, she laughed at my awkward attempt to ask a question, her eyes, bright as polished quartz, softening when she realized I believed in her fire as much as she did. In that moment, as we ducked into a coffee shop overflowing with espresso steam and late-night ambitions, I vowed to be her partner in every sense. When Galenix Systems recruited Isla straight out of our program, I felt both pride and trepidation twisting in my chest. She had earned it. Promotions came like accolades for her fearless innovations, each one fueled by the back-end frameworks I'd sketched out during weekends and midnight coding sprints. I watched her ascend the corporate ladder, molding her career with the same precision she used to debug lines of code. Meanwhile, I shifted my consulting practice into overdrive, juggling clients who valued my analytical talents enough to pay premiums that kept our apartment rent paid and our dinners warm. Every late-night debugging session I undertook, every project I accepted on her behalf, was meant to build a foundation beneath our shared future. She promised me, more than once, over takeout noodles and half-empty wine glasses, "When I make it, we make it." Those words echoed in my mind as I drafted complex neural network models and scaled databases to millions of daily transactions. I remodeled outdated data pipelines so smoothly that division budgets swelled by millions, yet I never claimed credit. Instead, I sent Isla the final reports and presentations emblazoned with her name, watching with quiet pride as she presented her results to the board. We were a team, my labor, her leadership, but in the hallways of Galenix, I was invisible. My role was always defined as the supportive spouse, the behind-the-scenes anchor to her soaring ambition. I built the back-end model that saved her division $4.2 million, a feat that landed Isla the Innovator of the Year award long before I'd ever seen her trophy. I introduced her to my mentor, Gregory Ames, whose early guidance on data architecture shaped my career and, by extension, hers. Gregory's endorsement opened doors to boardroom meetings and executive committees for Isla, while I continued to refine logs and optimize code in the quiet glow of my home office. Every accolade she collected, every glass of champagne she raised in that ballroom, was buoyed by the sleepless nights I spent calibrating algorithms so intricate they could predict market trends with uncanny precision. Yet, despite this, I remained exiled at home. Invitations to client mixers landed in my inbox when they landed at all. They were reminders of the life outside my solitary domain of servers and syntax. Photos of her rubbing elbows with venture capitalists and corporate partners circulated on LinkedIn while I tapped away under a desk lamp. "She's half of a power couple," magazines said, but the other half was obscured behind a curtain of corporate PR. Even our own living room felt like a waiting room, her input overshadowing my contributions as she rehearsed speeches and forecasted profit margins. I was her confidant, her crisis manager, her unpaid QA tester. And yet, when the lights gleamed in that ballroom corridor, I was deemed unworthy of a single seat. Sometimes I confronted myself with doubt. Had I made the right choice by fading into the background? But whenever uncertainty threatened to root itself in my mind, I revisited the lines of code I'd written, the data visualizations I'd crafted, the recommendation engines I'd fine-tuned. Each iteration stood as testament to my expertise. If I hadn't been beside her, those models would have remained raw ideas in a research paper, stripped of the battle-tested elegance my hands had afforded them. When Isla's division began to outperform projections by double digits, it was the system I architected that bore the lion's share of that success. Still, I was never invited to events. My name never appeared on press releases. My presence was unacknowledged in board meetings where executives referred to Isla's achievements, without acknowledging that Isla's achievements often began with my work. The narrative was hers alone. I watched, time and again, as she accepted accolades with poise, her speeches polished, her smile radiant, while I lingered in the wings, content in my convictions that loyalty meant sacrifice. But inside me, a quiet ember smoldered, fueled by the injustice of erasure. And still, I helped. I refined business logic at 2 a.m., responded to panicked Slack messages from her team at dawn, and rewrote stalled modules while she traveled the globe on speaking tours. Every act of assistance felt like an investment in a shared future that would one day repay my counsel with recognition. Yet the higher she rose, the more invisible I became. My support was guaranteed, but my aspirations were barred from every party and every gala. Each exclusion felt like a refusal to acknowledge the invisible scaffolding I'd erected, piece by painstaking piece. Now, As the fragments of memory flicker in my mind, I realize that those legends of corporate triumph were hollow without credit where it was due. The foundation they forgot was mine to reclaim. I would no longer consent to anonymity, no longer bow before a system that thrived on my ingenuity yet refused me a seat at its pinnacle. My proof lay in every encrypted file, every time-stamped archive, every witness who knew my role. I had crafted a platform strong enough to rebel against its own creators, and as the embers of betrayal burned through my resolve, I understood. If they would not build us, I would build me. There would be no turning back. I arrived at the Grand Marlowe Hotel feeling a knot of anticipation tangled deep in my chest, the same tightness I'd experienced the first time I'd introduced Isla as my fiancée to my friends. I had rehearsed my compliments. How proud I was of her patent-pending predictive model, how honored I felt to accompany her to this recognition. But none of it mattered once I stood before the polished brass doors and spotted Marla, Isla's assistant, fluttering clipboard in hand. Her eyes widened when she saw the flowers and my tailored navy suit. "Sir, you're here for Mrs. Dre's award ceremony," she asked, voice laced with polite surprise. I nodded, handing her the bouquet. She flipped through her schedule and furrowed her brow. "Hold on. I thought this was an adults-only event. I'm not seeing your name on the guest list." Panic lanced through me, but I told myself it was a clerical error. Marla offered a sympathetic smile and suggested I check with the door attendant. She pressed her phone to her ear and disappeared down the corridor. I squared my shoulders and approached the guard, whose uniform bore the embroidered Gaelnick's emblem. He glanced at the flowers and at me, then back at nothing, as though I were a ghost haunting an event I had every right to attend. "Name?" he asked. "Corwin Dre," I replied, keeping my tone steady. "Husband of the award recipient." He lifted a thin ledger and leafed through. "Not on the list. You'll have to wait outside." The words crashed into me with the weight of a betrayal I couldn't have foreseen. I squeezed my eyes shut, tasting cotton, and swallowed. His gaze never met mine. He delivered his verdict as if reciting facts, not condemning humanity. I stepped back, the corridor suddenly sterile and glaring. My polished shoes echoed on the marble floor, reverberating around me like a drumbeat of humiliation. I clutched the flowers, their petals trembling against my palm, and forced myself to look through the frosted glass at the celebration unfolding beyond. The ballroom dazzled with crystal chandeliers and a glittering crowd. Servers in crisp jackets floated between tables bearing trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Women in gowns traced constellations of sequins, men in tuxedos chattered in clusters. At the center of it all stood my wife, Isla, every inch the star she had become. Her laughter carried through the room, rich and unguarded, until her glance brushed past me, landing on someone else. Damon Creed angled his head toward Isla, his lips hovering close to her ear as he whispered something that made her shoulder quiver. I couldn't hear the words, but her reaction said enough. She was wholly invested in his presence. I watched as she tilted her head, eyes alight with approval, her hand drifting to rest on his forearm. The intimacy of their gesture ripped through me, opening a wound I hadn't believed possible. Damon's grin was easy and practiced, the kind of smile reserved for someone who knew the perks of power. I recognized him from company newsletters. He was the VP of Finance, a man whose acumen had been extolled in every quarterly report. Until tonight, he'd been just an avatar on a PowerPoint slide, not a figure poised between my wife's ear and her heart. My breath stuttered. I remembered a time when I introduced Isla to Damon at an after-hours mixer, presenting them with equal pride. She'd greeted him warmly, spoken of her husband's freelance successes, and laid out my contributions like trophies on a velvet tray. Damon had nodded appreciatively, his handshake firm and respectful. Now he rested his arm against her, speaking words I would never hear, his presence a silent invitation to exclusion. They had replaced our shared promise with an unspoken allegiance. The thought shattered the last of my composure. I straightened, a current of resolve pulsing through my veins. I would not stand by while my life, my 8 years of devotion, was reduced to a footnote in someone else's narrative. The guard's dismissal was an insult, but Isla's betrayal was a declaration of war. I slipped my phone from my pocket, my fingers brushing the cool glass screen as though seeking permission. The seconds ticked by, magnified in the hush of my racing heartbeat. Then I tapped out the message I had prepared ever since realizing Isla might have waltzed into someone else's arms. You've been compromised. Check your inbox. Now, sending those words felt like drawing a line in the sand, a signal flare of indignation thrust into the smoke of my humiliation. I pocketed the phone and stepped away from the door, each footfall echoing conviction. Behind me, I heard the faint click of the guard's radio as he reported an unauthorized message to the CEO. I didn't pause to watch the fallout. I knew the edict would set off alarms, pivoting the room's attention inward. My betrayal would become their crisis. This was the moment I reclaimed my story. As I rounded the corridor corner, I felt Marla's presence beside me. She glanced at my bouquet, and then at my calm expression, so unlike the confusion that must have flashed across her face moments before. "Mr. Dre," she whispered, voice low and urgent. The entire event just paused. Mrs. Dre and Mr. Creed looked like they were arguing. "The CEO is asking for you." At her words, relief and vindication surged, nodding with a fierce pride. I turned to face the ballroom doors one last time. Through the glass, I saw Isla's smirk falter as she searched for me among the throng, disbelief blooming across her features. Damon's confidence wavered as murmurs rippled through the guests. I imagined the spreadsheet of her triumphs collapsing in code, revealing the scaffolding beneath. I inhaled, releasing the weight of 8 years of unacknowledged labor. The world beyond that door had for too long thrived on my contributions while denying me recognition. Now they had my undivided attention, and they would learn what it meant to face the architect of their downfall. With the bouquet in one hand and unshakable purpose in the other, I stepped into the annex hallway, where the CEO's office beckoned like a gladiatorial arena. The stage had shifted, the script rewritten, and I, once an invisible spouse, stood at center, ready to claim the spotlight that had always belonged to me. Months ago, long before the awards ceremony corridor became my crucible, I began quietly assembling evidence of my existence beyond the role of unpaid supporter. It started as a whisper in my mind. If they refused to see me, I would make them see the foundation I laid, brick by data brick. My first act was to create a secure archive, tucked away on an encrypted server hidden behind layers of authentication I had designed myself. Every line of code I wrote for Isla's projects, every refactoring of legacy systems, every optimization of data pipelines, each segment was logged, timestamped, and hashed with unique fingerprints that only I possessed. It was meticulous work, performed in the hush of my home office as the hum of servers and the soft glow of monitors kept me company. I felt like a cartographer charting an undiscovered territory, mapping my own contributions so completely that denial would be impossible. With each late-night session, I built a record that stretched across the years. Scripts I had authored, modules I had rewritten, system architectures I had orchestrated. I cataloged my original source code alongside the presentations Isla delivered in executive boardrooms, slide by slide, version by version. I used secure, version-controlled repositories to link my raw algorithms with the polished dashboards her team displayed as proof of her vision. Every contribution was backed by commits bearing my name and embedded cryptographic signatures, effectively branding each line as indisputably mine. I even documented the countless video calls where I guided her through bug fixes and performance tuning, capturing screen recordings that silently bore witness to my role as her technical co-pilot. Next, I harvested the human element. I reached out to former collaborators on freelance gigs where Isla had shadowed me, gathering testimonials that affirmed I was the architect behind the models Galenix lauded as revolutionary. One by one, they reaffirmed what I already knew. My expertise had fueled innovations no boardroom could ignore. I compiled these statements into a dossier woven together with annotated transcripts of Slack conversations in which executives praised Corwin's insights in private channels, only to see public accolades redirected toward Isla. My goal was not vengeance, but truth, an unflinching display of the gap between praise whispered behind closed doors and the glaring erasure in front of the lights. When the affair with Damon Creed surfaced, I resisted the urge to explode. Screaming at Isla would have been cathartic, but it would not have carried the undeniable weight of evidence. Instead, I doubled down on my strategy. I scoured security footage from the conference where Isla first unveiled the model that saved her division millions, discreetly requesting archives under the pretense of a lost USB drive. Those grainy clips showed her entering a hotel suite with Damon, their arms entwined in conversation too intimate for mere colleagues. I downloaded the recordings and timestamped them in my secure vault, ready to produce them at the precise moment they would sting the hardest. I left no loose ends. I secured audio files from the client dinner where Damon, flushed with arrogance, casually dismissed me as basically a ghost, while Isla laughed at his punchlines. I extracted every sliver of corroborating media, layering it atop the cryptographic proof of my technical authorship. Finally, I curated a letter of intent from Lumatech Ventures, a shining endorsement I had discreetly secured after a chance meeting with one of their partners. Their offer, $1 million to fund my own platform built on the very framework Galenix exploited, was the final piece of my puzzle. With their top 3 clients pre-committed, I held the power not only to expose Galenix's theft, but to usurp its clients and leave them scrambling. All of this I distilled into a single email addressed to Valen Rock, the CEO whose handshake I'd once accepted at a company gala, unaware I was shaking hands with my own erasure. The subject line, "You might want to sit down," was chosen to cut through corporate decorum. Inside lay attachments, side-by-side comparisons of my original code and Isla's presentation, security footage of intimate meetings, audio recordings of dismissive remarks, and the Lumatech letter. Each document spoke a piece of the story I would no longer whisper behind closed doors. I hit send at the precise moment I saw Damon's smug grin emerge on stage across from Isla, confident his power protected him. I knew the email would land at Valen's inbox as the ceremony reached its crescendo, forcing an eruption of accountability that no polished speech could contain. On that night, as the CEO's phone buzzed and Marla's message confirmed the ballroom's sudden hush, I watched from the corridor with a grim satisfaction. I had taken every painstaking step not for revenge but for recognition. Recognition of the countless hours I invested, the creativity I poured into every repository, and the sacrifices I made so she could shine. I had built more than code. I had built consequences. Now, those consequences were unfolding in real time. As the door to the ballroom finally swung open and executives flooded into the hallway, their expressions a mixture of outrage and astonishment, I felt the culmination of my strategy materialize. Security-minded facepalm moments turned to frantic whispers. The CEO emerged, eyes wide, phone still in hand, seeking me out through the crowd. I walked forward with steady steps, my bouquet still clutched in one hand, a living testament to every night I spent nurturing her dreams at the expense of my own. No longer would I wait outside. No longer would I fade into the backdrop of her narrative. I was the architect of my destiny and the unraveling of theirs. Proof that the foundation they forgot was one they could never fully ignore. I settled into my home office well before dawn, the city still clinging to silence as I booted up my workstation, the screens awakening with a soft blue glow that felt like the calm before a storm. I poured myself a mug of black coffee, no sugar, no cream, letting the bitter warmth anchor me in the moment. My heart thrummed with purpose. Today was the culmination of months of clandestine preparation, the moment when every sleepless night, every line of uncredited code, would be laid bare. I had spent hours refining the presentation attachments, compressing high-resolution security footage, and ensuring each cryptographic hash matched byte for byte in the CEO's inbox. There would be no ambiguity, no doubt, just cold, incontrovertible truth. First, I opened the side-by-side comparison document. On one side, the clean, professional slides Isla had presented with her name in bold at the top. On the other, my original source code screenshots with comments and commit logs bearing my signature. I watched as each slide transitioned to reveal the identical data flows and logic structures I had written. My fingers hovered over the trackpad for a moment, feeling the weight of this evidence, proof of my role invisible no longer. Next, I navigated to the security footage folder, where grainy night vision clips from the hotel's backup system waited patiently. I clicked through the timestamps, Isla and Damon Creed laughing as they entered the suite, Damon leaning in to whisper something that made her stiffen, then lean back, her hand brushing his arm in a gesture far more intimate than any professional alliance. I cropped each clip, labeled them with precise timecodes, and compressed them into a password-protected archive, the passphrase a random string of characters only I would remember. My coffee cooled on the corner of the desk while I transferred the encrypted audio files. Those recordings captured the soft clink of wine glasses, the murmur of dinner conversation, and Damon's voice, low and arrogant. Her husband? He's basically a ghost. Isla had laughed at that line, as though it were clever banter rather than the stabbing betrayal it was. I trimmed out the ambient noise, normalized the levels, and appended a brief transcript, every word timestamped so the CEO could see exactly when prejudice had been uttered. With each piece of media loaded into the main file drop folder, satisfaction bloomed in my chest. I was no longer the ghost. I was the one holding the lantern. Finally, I opened the PDF of the LUMATEC Ventures letter of intent. Its corporate letterhead gleamed. We are pleased to offer Corwin Dre a $2.1 million founding round to develop Nexus Hexa, leveraging the core AI logistics framework he pioneered. Beneath it, bullet points outlined projected milestones, projected revenue, and, most crucially, endorsements from 3 of Galanix's top clients ready to migrate to my platform. That offer was the exclamation mark on my dossier. Proof that the world valued my work even if my wife's company refused to recognize it. I saved the file as lumatech_letter_corwin_dre.pdf and added it to the folder. The clock on my monitor blinked 6:45 a.m., 2 hours before business emails would begin trickling into the CEO's inbox. I paused to stretch, cracked my knuckles, and glanced around at the neat stacks of technical journals, awards plaques from freelance clients, and whiteboard sketches of system architectures on the walls. This was my kingdom, quiet, unassuming, built on the bedrock of my intellect. Soon, it would become Galanix's reckoning. At precisely 6:50 a.m., I opened my email client and composed a new message to Valen Rock. In the subject line, I typed the words I wanted to echo through the halls of corporate power. You might want to sit down. Inside the body, I wrote a brief, professional note. Valen. What follows is a comprehensive dossier detailing the true authorship and genesis of the analytics platform your company lauded as a breakthrough. I trust you will review the attachments carefully. Corwin Dre, I clicked the paperclip icon and navigated to the file drop folder. One by one, the attachments populating beneath the subject line glowed with potential. Slide_comparison_Corwin_versus_Isla.pdf, hotel suite_footage.zip. Dinner audio_creed_transcript. MP3 and lumatech_letter_corwin_dre.pdf. I double-checked each file name, each size, each order. Everything was impeccable. With a steady hand, I pressed send. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the email status shifted to sent, and I closed my laptop. The evidence was now in motion, traveling through firewalls and servers, poised to interrupt the CEO's morning ritual of routine memos and shareholder updates. As I rose from my chair, a quiet confidence settled over me. The world I had abandoned for 8 years, the world of corporate soirees and empty compliments, would soon have to acknowledge my existence on its own terms. I walked to the window overlooking the city skyline, the first rays of sunlight gilding glass towers and signaling the dawn of a new beginning. When Valen Rock opened that email, he would find not only the truth about Isla's achievements but also an invitation. Join me as an equal in the venture backed by Lumatex Capital and my vision. I could almost see the ripple effects already. Boardroom chairs shifting, phone calls scrambling, reputations unraveling beneath the weight of my proof. Later that morning, I would answer calls from frantic executives, field inquiries from HR, and negotiate my exit from Galanix. But in this moment, alone, triumphant, and unburdened by unspoken contributions, I allowed myself to savor a single, deep breath of victory. I had turned my erasure into evidence and transformed my betrayal into opportunity. No longer would I toil in obscurity while others claimed my victories. The file drop was not just a revelation, it was an act of reclamation. The subject line of the email read, "You might want to sit down." I was only 5 brisk steps from my car when my phone erupted in lights and vibrations, each alert an exclamation point marking the start of the fallout I'd engineered. The first was a call from Valen Rock himself, his name flashing urgently on the screen. I glanced down, thumb hovering over accept, and then let it go to voicemail. Next came a text from Muriel Vaughn, the COO. "Where are you?" The question was laced with panic and uncharacteristic exasperation. Had she truly believed this would be a private affair, resolved with a congratulatory speech? Finally, a message from Tad Sorrento, the HR director. "Please don't make any rash decisions." His words dripped with concern and a hint of accusation, as though I were about to topple some fragile order he'd spent his career maintaining. I slid the phone back into my pocket, the adrenaline of anticipation coursing through my veins. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. The building's sliding doors whooshed behind me, and for a moment I stood in the night air, reveling in the hush of the parking lot. Then, as though summoned by the orchestration of my dossier, the door behind me burst open. Damon Creed emerged first, tuxedo jacket flapping like an alarmed bird's wings and cheeks flushed with humiliation and anger. His eyes darted desperately, searching the dimly lit walkway for me, his expression a jigsaw of indignation and disbelief. Behind him, Marla, Isla's assistant, hurried into view, her clipboard abandoned on the marble floor, lips parted as though struggling to keep pace with her own surprise. Marla's eyes locked onto mine as she skidded to a halt, her breath catching in her throat. She placed a hand on my arm, her touch light but urgent. "Mr. Dre," she murmured, voice trembling. "Whatever you did, the whole room just flipped." I raised an eyebrow, curiosity piqued, as images of chaos danced through my mind. Executives pausing mid-toast, champagne glasses frozen in midair, applause screeching to an abrupt halt. Did they finally read it? I asked quietly, letting the question hang between us like a gauntlet. She nodded, her gaze flickering toward the hotel entrance where an assemblage of storming staff likely swirled in search of answers. Damon's chest heaved as he tried to catch his breath, his gaze flickering between Marla and me. His composure had evaporated. The VP of Finance now resembled a cornered animal, frustration and desperation etching deep lines around his eyes. "Corwin," he gasped, voice rough as gravel. "What have you done?" I stepped closer, the harsh overhead lighting carving shadows into his features. "What I should have done years ago," I replied, voice low but steady. I met his gaze without flinching, letting the weight of those words settle on him like a leaden cloak. Damon's eyebrows knitted together, and for a fleeting moment, regret flickered behind his eyes before he masked it with anger. Marla swallowed hard and glanced over her shoulder, as though expecting a posse of outraged executives to descend at any second. "Valen's on his way out," she whispered. "He's demanding answers. Muriel has secured a conference room, but everyone's shaken." I allowed a small, satisfied smile to tug at my lips. After 8 years of being unseen, this was the first time they truly saw me, the catalyst of their crisis. "Good," I said, words soft but victorious. "They should have listened a long time ago." Damon's lips twisted into a bitter sneer. "You think you've won?" he spat. "You think you can just walk away after ruining everything?" My smile widened. "I already have," I said, letting the finality of the statement hang in the humid night air. I turned my back on him, ready to leave this accusatory figure behind, but Marla's voice stopped me. "Mr. Dre, there's someone else who wants to see you." She nodded toward the entrance, where a cluster of suited figures was pooling under the lobby lights. I recognized Valen's silhouette in the center, a man of composed stature, but his shoulders were bowed just slightly, a crack in his CEO armor. I squared my shoulders and walked toward him, every step echoing certainty. Damon cursed under his breath and followed, but I didn't look back. The narrative had shifted irrevocably. As I approached, Valen's gaze snapped to me, eyes glazed with a mixture of respect and rueful realization. He opened his mouth, but for a heartbeat, no words emerged. Instead, he held up his phone, screen illuminated with my email and a slew of unopened attachments. "Corwin," he began, voice heavy, "we have a lot to discuss." I offered a curt nod. "Then let's discuss it somewhere private." Marla stepped aside, and Valen led me through the now emptying lobby, lights buzzing overhead like cicadas in summer. Each footstep felt like a reclamation of agency. I was no longer a figure sketched in the margins of my own life. Before the doors closed behind us, I caught sight of Damon standing alone in the corridor, arms folded in defeat. A spark of something envy? Remorse glimmered in his eyes before he turned away. I allowed myself a final glance at the man who had laughed beside my wife mere hours ago, then focused on the path ahead. Inside the conference room, the hum of urgent whispers greeted me like an overture. Valen closed the door behind us and gestured to a seat at the head of the table, an irony that made me stifle a laugh. Instead, I remained standing, letting every executive in the room meet my gaze. Muriel cleared her throat. "Corwin, thank you for coming." Her tone was cautious, respectful. Tad hovered at the edge of the circle, phone still pressed to his ear, likely freezing every word for HR records. Valen stood and stepped forward, folding the phone into his pocket. "Your dossier," he said, voice soft but unwavering, "is comprehensive." He paused, swallowing. "I want to apologize." None of us realized. His words trailed off under the weight of his own admission. I watched his stern facade crumble, replaced by genuine regret. I uncrossed my arms and met his apology with measured calm. "I wasn't looking for apologies," I said. "I was looking for acknowledgement." The room was silent, tension thick enough to carve into shapes. "I want two things," I continued. "I want full credit for the work I built and a path forward that respects my contributions. And I want to ensure those who erased me understand that code and people cannot be silenced without consequence." Valen's gaze flicked toward Muriel and then to Tad. When he turned back to me, his expression was resolute. "We will do right by you," he promised. "You'll be formally credited, and we'll work to rectify the oversight. As for your meeting with LUM AdTech, let's talk about how we can match their offer." I allowed that seed of doubt to sprout. Did I want to return to a place that had denied me? But I tamped it down. Reconciliation could be as strategic as reclamation. "I'll consider it," I said, voice even. As I left the conference room, the bustling hotel corridors seemed strangely hollow. Excitement mingled with apprehension in the air. The once familiar walls now felt alien, steeped in revelations. Outside, the night sky beckoned vast and unclaimed. I rubbed my thumb against my phone in my pocket, ensuring the LUM AdTech letter remained at my fingertips. The hallway stampede had been more than a spectacle, it had been a turning point. No longer would I linger in the shadows of my own life. I was ready to step into the light on my terms, and the world would have to follow. I sank onto the edge of my couch, the plush cushions yielding beneath me as the adrenaline from the hallway confrontation finally began to ebb. My phone lay hot against my palm, its screen illuminating the dimly lit living room with the name I never expected to see there. Renora Keene, chairman of the board. My breath caught. Renora was the one I'd coveted approval from most of all, whose nod could vault a career or doom it. I hesitated only a fraction of a heartbeat before sliding the green icon to answer. "Mr. Dre," her voice came through, steadier than I anticipated, but laced with the gravity of someone perched on the brink of upheaval. "I want to apologize on behalf of Galenix." Her words washed over me like a cool wave, drowning the last embers of bitterness I'd carried through the night. I closed my eyes, pressing the phone against my ear as I gathered myself. "I believe you," I said, my voice flat but honest. "But now you do." A brief silence followed, filled only by the soft hum of my home office air purifier. I imagined Renora pacing a wood-paneled study, her gaze flicking between photographs of the company's founding partners and the blinking cursor on the email she'd read just moments ago. Behind her corporate facade, she was a woman grappling with betrayal of epic proportions. "We'd like to schedule a meeting," she offered after a respectful pause, words carefully chosen, like chess moves in a match both delicate and decisive. I inhaled, considering my next move. Every instinct urged me to leverage this moment, to negotiate from the pinnacle of my newfound power. But I also knew the truth. If they wanted reconciliation, they'd have to meet me on my terms. "I've already scheduled one, with your clients," I replied, tone cool. "They're ready to move to Nexus Hexa." There was a flicker, almost audible, in her breath. "We'll match Lumitech's offer," she said with quiet determination, "and give you a seat on the executive board." The words sounded generous, even monumental. This was the kind of restoration most people would leap at. But I'd tasted freedom in those corridor shadows. I'd felt the weight of 8 years of erasure lift from my shoulders. "I don't need a seat at your table," I said, voice softening but resolute. "I've already built my own." Silence reigned. I imagined Renora's astonishment morphing into a grudging respect. A grudging acceptance that the man she had dismissed as a supportive spouse was now the founder of a rival platform. Behind me, the living room felt suddenly spacious, as though the walls were retreating to give me room to breathe. "Then let us support Nexus Hexa," she finally said, her tone both conciliatory and hopeful. "We can refer additional clients, provide technical resources, and share infrastructure." I allowed a small smile to touch my lips. "That would be appreciated," I said. "But the terms are clear. Nexus Hexa remains wholly mine. Your clients will migrate under my brand, with no holdbacks." "That's more than fair," she agreed, the hiss of her resolve loud even through the speaker. "We understand now, and I want to thank you for bringing this to light." I ended the call and set the phone aside, its screen dimming to black. For a moment, the only sound was my own steady heartbeat, a triumphant cadence that echoed through the quiet apartment. I looked around at the darkened windows, the starless sky outside, and felt an affinity to the night's vast expanse. Uncharted, limitless, mine to explore. I rose and crossed to my desk, where the LUMATEC letter lay beside my laptop. The printed words glowed like a promise. $2.1M founding round to build Nexus Hexa. Underneath, the signatures of partners I'd met at that chance networking dinner, now poised to place their trust in me. I slid the document into a sleek portfolio, my hand brushing its pristine cover with reverence. This letter wasn't just ink on paper. It was a declaration that I stood not in someone's shadow, but at the head of my own destiny. As dawn crept over the horizon, I began mapping out the next steps. I would contact Dr. Imani Shore to confirm the CTO onboarding schedule, finalize contracts with Zahir Aluo to set up operations, and send personalized confirmation emails to each of the 3 pre-signed enterprise clients. The company name, Nexus Hexa, glowed on my vision board, flanked by whiteboard sketches of roadmap timelines and feature rollouts. Images of the sleek dashboard I had designed, the modular code libraries I'd architected, and the AI-driven logistics flows I'd perfected flickered to life behind my eyelids. But even as I immersed myself in the practicalities of expansion, I couldn't fully exorcise the personal triumph that thrummed beneath it all. I had transformed 8 years of silent labor into a rebellion that redefined my worth. I had turned the tables on a world that saw me as an accessory rather than as an engineer. And in so doing, I had built more than a company. I had built evidence, my legacy in code. Later that morning, the media would pick up the story. How an anonymous architect had engineered his own revelation. How stock prices plummeted at Galenix while Nexus Hexa surged into pre-launch limelight. Headlines would hail the rise of a new player in AI logistics, while comically, corporate gossip would circulate about the VP of Finance who fell from grace and the award-winning executive who had overlooked her own spouse. None of it could diminish the truth. I had reclaimed my agency. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes, allowing the weight of possibility to wash over me. Outside, the first birds began their cautious morning calls. Inside, I felt entirely awake, sharpened by the knowledge that I no longer needed someone else's approval to validate my talents. I had built my own table, and it was more than a seat beneath a spotlight. It was an empire wrought from integrity, grit, and the quiet brilliance I had always possessed. My phone buzzed again, this time with an email notification from LUMATEC's general counsel confirming the wire transfer schedule. I smiled and tapped the screen to open it. As I reviewed the final details of the funding rollout, I thought of Isla, smirking in that ballroom, and of Damon Creed, searching for me in the corridor. They had thought me vanished, a ghost to be ignored. Instead, I had reappeared as their reckoning, and this time, no one would be able to wait outside my world. When I opened my inbox to the LUMATEC wire confirmation, I felt the air in my apartment shift, charged, electric, brimming with possibility. 8 years of unseen labor had crystallized into $2.1 million dedicated to Nexus Hexa. I poured a cup of strong Ethiopian coffee and leaned over my desk, scanning the initial balance and thinking through the first priority, assembling the team that would transform promise into code, code into product, and product into disruption. The first call I made was to Dr. Imani Shore, my friend from grad school and now a world-class AI researcher. Imani answered on the third ring, her voice warm with genuine excitement. "Corwin, are you ready to change the game?" she asked. My heart thudded with anticipation. "More than ever," I replied. Within hours, she agreed to join as CTO, bringing her theoretical brilliance and leadership to Nexus Hexa's core. Next, I dialed Zahir Aluo, the talented Galenix engineer whose quiet competence had once propelled Isla's division forward. We collaborated on late-night debugging sessions, and I knew his operational acumen could turn a vision into a living, breathing platform. Zahir answered with a laugh that shadowed disbelief. "You mean you want me to build your dream, not hers?" His question carried the subtext of shared injustice. I told him everything: the email, the betrayal, the launch plan. He paused, then said, "I'm in." By sundown, we had our executive team. Imani overseeing AI architecture, Zahir managing infrastructure and deployment, and me helming product strategy and investor relations. With leadership in place, I drafted a roadmap that balanced agility with ambition. The first milestone was to integrate the core logistics algorithms I'd originally built for Galenix into a modular, user-friendly interface. We labeled it Phase 1, set sprint cycles for 4-week intervals, and established key performance indicators. Latency targets under 200 milliseconds, accuracy improvements of 15% over legacy solutions, and seamless onboarding for enterprise clients. I spent nights reviewing wireframes and participation in Slack channels where Imani and Zahir volleyed technical ideas back and forth. They built prototypes of UX flows, load testing scenarios, and scalable cloud configurations faster than I'd imagined possible. Each morning, I woke to commit logs and demo videos that showcased our progress. Proof that Nexus Hexa would not be a Me-Too knockoff but a superior product born from the ashes of neglect. Within a month of Lumitex funding transfer, I reached out to the 3 Galenix clients pre-committed to Nexus Hexa. Their responses were swift and enthusiastic. They had grown frustrated by flaky system updates, by service-level agreements broken without warning, and by the opaque roadmap they'd been handed. When I personally demoed our platform for them, their delight felt like vindication. I guided their teams through intuitive dashboards powered by our predictive AI, demonstrating seamless route optimization, real-time inventory forecasting, and a clean API that slashed integration time in half. Hearing their cheers and receiving messages of appreciation reminded me that I was no longer a ghost, but a partner in their success. The day we launched the Nexus Hexa website, I pushed a celebratory message across our social channels and investor network. The design was clean, a hero banner declaring logistics intelligence, unleashed, followed by interactive demos and testimonials from early adopters. I clicked Publish and watched as website analytics lit up in real time. Then I opened my portfolio in the trading app and saw a notice: Galenix Systems stock down 6.8%. A knot of satisfaction tightened in my chest. The company that had once erased me now felt the tremor of my arrival. It was fitting that their quarterly report would bear my signature, even if unofficially. The metrics driving their decline were the same I designed. Within days, my phone buzzed with breaking news. Damon Creed had tendered his resignation. The press release cited personal reasons, but industry insiders knew better. It was the fallout from the scandal, the public acknowledgement of a system whose roots traced back to a bedroom office. Damon's departure symbolized the collapse of the false house of cards built on my code. Isla, too, faced consequences. The board quietly reassigned her to an internal research role, far from client presentations. No public announcement honored her past achievements. The abrupt transfer left her professional reputation in limbo. I heard she packed her office belongings in silence, escorted by HR, her smile nowhere to be found. I should have felt triumphant over their missteps, but a pang of something, regret, maybe, rippled through me. This was more than a corporate takedown. It was the unmasking of a relationship built on lies. Still, I reminded myself that justice demanded exposure, not mercy. I had reclaimed my narrative and built something that stood on its own merits. As Nexus Hexa's sign-on numbers climbed and our beta testers praised the platform's elegance, I felt a surge of pride. Each client adoption was a testament to my expertise and to the undeniable value of recognizing contributions where they belong. On launch day, I celebrated with my team. Imani and Zahir joined me at a rooftop bar overlooking the city skyline. We toasted to long nights, to perseverance, and to the future we would shape. Glasses clinked, laughter echoed across the terrace. I watched the neon reflections dance on the river below and thought of the corridors where I once waited invisible. The contrast was stark. Then, I stood outside a ballroom with nowhere to sit. Now, I commanded the view at the table I had built. It was more than a reversal of fortune. It was proof that talent overshadowed titles. That evening, as the skyline shifted into nocturnal hues, my phone vibrated with a single email. An invitation from a major logistics conference to speak on emerging AI trends. The subject line read, "Keynote invitation, the architect behind Nexus Hexa." I paused, fingers hovering over the keyboard, remembering the disregard I once endured. Then I crafted my acceptance, with pleasure. I look forward to sharing our journey. I hit send and leaned back, allowing the moment to sink in. In the days that followed, media outlets picked up on the story arc. The unsung engineer who built the backbone of a corporate empire, the spouse who vanished only to reemerge as its competitor, and the platform rising to challenge the very institution that tried to silence him. Profiles ran on tech blogs, interviews aired on business networks, and LinkedIn endorsed me with dozens of recommendations. Still, I remained grounded in the work, the code reviews, the feature planning, the client support calls. Because while recognition felt sweet, I understood that success was made of substance, not headlines. Under Imani's guidance, the AI engine entered its first public beta. Under Zahir's oversight, we scaled to handle surges of data with ease. And with each client's praise echoing in my inbox, I knew I had built more than a platform. I had built proof. Proof that an individual's contributions could not be erased. Proof that talent and integrity would outlast betrayal. Proof that waiting outside was simply the beginning. And as Nexus Hexa's logo glowed on my laptop screen, I felt a profound certainty. This was only chapter 1 in a story I would author without apology. When the invitation arrived, I almost deleted it out of habit. Another unsolicited pitch deck review, another webinar I would politely decline. But the subject line stopped me cold. Keynote speaker invitation, Global AI Integration Forum. It was slated for 6 months hence, right when Nexus Hexa would emerge from beta. I paused, recalling the empty hallway outside Isla's award ceremony, the place where I had once been told to wait outside. Now, they wanted me inside their most prestigious event. I accepted immediately. On the morning of the forum, I arrived at the conference center early, blazer crisp, and Nexus Hexa badge gleaming. The lobby buzzed with anticipation. Attendees whispered about the lineup, tech journalists buzzed in reporter clusters, and exhibitors fine-tuned their booths. I set my briefcase by the stage door and slipped into the back hallway, where I quieted my nerves by skimming through my speech notes. I planned to open with honesty, no polished corporate platitudes, just the raw truth of my journey from invisible engineer to platform founder. As mid-morning arrived, staff ushered me onto the stage. The lights warmed my face. The sea of seats stretched before me, already filling. I took a deep breath, stepped up to the podium, and activated the first slide behind me. Its title read simply, "I was once told, you can wait outside." A hush fell. I surveyed the crowd. Partners from logistics giants, VCs with their crisp suits, and, tucked near a structural pillar at the back, a familiar silhouette, Isla. She sat with her shoulders squared, expression guarded as though bracing for impact. Beside her, I spotted Renora Keene and Muriel Vaughn, their eyes flicking between me and the screen. Clearing my throat, I began, "Thank you for having me. I'm Corwin Dre, and 6 months ago, I launched Nexus Hexa because I refused to wait outside a room that I built." Murmurs rippled through the audience. I advanced the slide, a side-by-side of the ballroom corridor and a snippet of my email subject line. That night, I continued. I didn't just expose theft, I exposed a truth. Contributions matter more than credit, and AI systems, like people, need acknowledgement to function at their best. The next slide showed our live dashboard, overlaying real-time logistics data. I walked through our platform's capabilities, predictive routing algorithms that slash delivery times by 18%, dynamic inventory forecasts that reduce stockouts by 22%, and a modular architecture clients could customize in hours, not months. As I spoke, I could feel the energy shift. What began as curiosity had blossomed into excitement. Questions scribbled in notebooks multiplied. Hands rose in eager anticipation. Toward the end of my presentation, I shared a brief video clip. Imani explaining our AI training pipeline, Zahir detailing our scalable infrastructure, and clients praising our transparent roadmap. This, I said, voice resonant, is what happens when you recognize every contributor. When you build a culture of inclusion and credit, innovation accelerates, trust deepens, and technology thrives. The applause was immediate and sustained, a rolling thunder that filled the hall. After the session, I stepped off stage and navigated the bustling aisles. Reporters approached with microphones, executives extended business cards, attendees waved for selfies. A group of logistics directors cornered me near the coffee station, eager to discuss pilot programs. I smiled and engaged each one, feeling the thrill of collaboration replace the sting of exclusion I once endured. Then I turned a corner and nearly collided with Isla. Her eyes widened, and for an instant, Vulnerability flickered across her face. "Corwin," she said, voice low and uncertain. I held up a hand, silencing her apology before she could form it. "This is my moment," I replied gently. "Not about what happened before, but about what comes next." Her lips trembled, and she nodded, stepping aside as Renora and Muriel arrived. Renora wrapped me in a brief hug, whispered congratulations, and introduced me to a board member eager to invest in our next funding round. Later that evening, I joined Imani and Zahir on the rooftop terrace overlooking the city's skyline. Glasses of sparkling water clinked as we toasted to the forum's success. Fireworks from a nearby festival painted the horizon in brilliant arcs, and I felt an overwhelming sense of completion. The architect of exclusion had become the architect of transformation. As the night deepened, my phone buzzed with a final notification, a confirmation from a major distributor that they would integrate Nexus Hexa into their operations. I pocketed the device and gazed at the illuminated buildings around us. In that moment, I understood that true triumph wasn't defined by one room or one speech. It was shaped by every step taken to ensure contributions are seen, credit is shared, and doors are opened for all who build the future. And as the fireworks echoes faded into the night, I realized that the stage, once my battleground, had become my platform, and I was finally home. When the notification pinged in my inbox, I saw Isla's name and my heart caught, an instinct I hadn't felt in months. The subject line read simply, "I didn't know." I hesitated, thumb hovering above the screen, recalling the night spent building code she claimed as her own, the laughter shared with Damon Creed, and the hollow seat that started it all. My finger trembled for a moment before I opened the message. Her words poured out in a trembling block of text. She claimed remorse, insisted she was manipulated by Damon, and swore she never intended to exclude me. She wrote of guilt and confusion, of sleepless nights replaying her betrayal, and begged for my forgiveness. She promised to set the record straight at Galenix, to reclaim her part in my vindication, to reach out to every client and colleague with proper acknowledgement. She ended with, "I still love you. Can we talk?" I read the email twice, then 3 times. Each time, the familiar ache surfaced, pain I'd transformed into purpose, the loss I'd turned into creation. I remembered the corridors, the evidence, the launch of Nexus Hexa, and the applause that gave me life. Forgiveness felt like erasing the proof I had fought so hard to compile, like walking back into the room where I had once waited outside. I stared at the blinking cursor, the empty reply field daring me to type something. But silence was my answer. I tapped Archive and let the message slip into the digital abyss. My phone screen dimmed, and I sat back, breathing evenly as the weight of closure settled over me. Outside, city lights twinkled against the night sky, luminous against the dark promise of tomorrow. In the distance, Imani and Zahir were likely celebrating another milestone, perhaps finalizing a new round of enterprise partnerships or testing a breakthrough in our AI algorithms. Nexus Hexa had become more than a platform. It was a testament to every line of code I'd written, every risk I'd taken, and every door I'd built along the way. No reply meant no reopening of old wounds. It meant I was free to chart the next chapter without looking backward. The chair at my table was mine alone, no longer borrowed, no longer denied. I powered down my laptop, rose from my desk, and crossed to the window. The city pulsed with possibility, 1,000 stories unfolding in parallel, each built on the choices we make. I felt a quiet gratitude for that final silence. Forgiveness could come one day, but not tonight. Tonight, I honored myself, the engineer, the strategist, the man who refused to remain invisible. I turned away from the window, the hum of the empty apartment greeting me like a welcome home. The email that was never answered became the closing line of a story no longer defined by someone else's narrative. It was my own, and at last, I was free.